Welcome back, students. This is Modular 10, Chapter 10, um, Problems or Issues in Working with Children and Families. And this is the video 2 out of 3 for the lecture for this particular modular. And where we left off was beginning to have a discussion about how are family problems defined. What we know is that culture can provide sort of a perspective in terms of how families might define a problem. So cultural values are an important consideration when looking at family problems as they're identified by the family. Community norms or values or attitudes also can play a role. Legal definitions. We have very clear legal um, terms that identify and outline what's considered child abuse. And that is all laid out in what's identified as the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974. And this provides clear and consistent definition of what constitutes child mistreatment. And then also availability of resources. Today, there's a debate as to the role government should play in intervening with families. So, in the past, um, having a child who was 10 years old and was working in a cotton mill or in a factory of some kind, um, that was a community norm. And we certainly don't expect 10-year-old children to be working today. So that's an example of how norms and values and attitudes can change over time. We certainly do know that 30 or 40 years ago, being a mother who has a child and is not married to the father, there was a tremendous stigma that was associated with that. That's not the case anymore. And so, again, here's another norm, value, or attitude that has changed over time. And so that's what we mean by that particular definition. So families have problems for many reasons. Families experiencing one problem may have other problems as well. So often things like child abuse, spousal abuse, alcoholism, teen pregnancy may all be found within the same family. Responses with services may be fragmented for a family with multiple issues due to the way that the programs are funded and or operated. So unfortunately, it's not an unusual occurrence that if you're a family that's dealing with multiple issues, there's not going to be sort of a one-stop shop, a place that you can go and really get assistance and support with all of the various issues that you may be dealing with. So you find yourself needing to use different agencies for different services to address different issues. It would be much better to treat all of the problems together as they may be interrelated. So, I mean, it's not uncommon if you're taking a look at alcoholism or substance abuse to also be seeing things like child abuse that has a direct relationship with the alcoholism or substance abuse. Same thing with spousal abuse. So that idea that these issues are all sort of interrelated makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Single women and people of color with children are more at risk for problems among families. So we've talked through various modulars about the economic disadvantages for people of color, that systemic racism and poverty are issues that are much more frequent in terms of people of color communities. And we also know that single women, because we've talked about things like the pay gap, and we've certainly recognized the fact that if you're a single person who's raising children, there's only one income that's coming in. And so that certainly puts you at risk for poverty. And being a family who's experiencing poverty is a significant contributing factor to family problems. So, families who live in poverty are correlated to problems within families. Families living in poverty experience increased stress, resulting in family problems. It'll be interesting to see how things work out with the current economic crisis that we find ourselves in, and whether we start to see more and more families that present for services. Single parent families may be at increased risk, whether it's a male parent or a female parent. And children who grow up in families with little or no social support may be at increased risk. So, families that don't have grandparents involved, that don't have other support systems involved, where there's only a single parent and they're sort of, taking care of the emotional, physical, and economic needs of the children in the family. That can be a really stressful situation that will result, obviously, in possible family problems. The authors talk about a concept identified as the feminization of poverty, a term used to describe the increasing number of single parent women being classified as poor. So, a significant percentage of the poverty in the United States is concentrated around women and their children. And the US Census showed that the earnings for men and women was quite different for those that are working full time. And again, that's something that we talked about in an earlier modular. So we're going to pause here. And when we come back, we're going to start talking about changing family situations. We're going to look at all these various different emerging and really kind of understanding now all of the different ways that families can be identified. So